It's 7:48 p.m. in a dimly lit apartment hallway. Evan Brooks, a 37-year-old single dad, just tucked his son into bed when a hesitant knock echoes from across the hall. It's the new neighbor. Her TV lost its signal and she's flustered. Evan grabs his toolbox, a reflex from years in the trade. He kneels behind the screen, checking cables, while the woman stands behind him, unnervingly silent. Suddenly, the screen flickers to life, casting a bright glow on her face. Evan stands up and his heart stops. Their eyes lock. Neither says a name, but they both know. The past just opened its door. Life for Evan Brooks was a cycle of constant motion and quiet sacrifice. He lived with his son, Lucas, in a small, rented apartment that always smelled faintly of sawdust, engine oil, and the lingering scent of laundry detergent. The walls were thin enough to hear the city's pulse, and the furniture was worn, showing the scuffs of a decade of living. But to Evan, it was a sanctuary. It was the place where he had rebuilt himself from the wreckage of a failed youth. Years ago, his world had fractured when his ex-wife walked out, leaving him with a toddler and a mountain of unanswered questions. He didn't dwell on the why anymore. Bitterness was a luxury he couldn't afford. He simply stepped up. He became the father who worked grueling 10-hour shifts as a residential electrician, his hands calloused and stained with the grime of old wiring, and still found the energy to read bedtime stories in a dozen funny voices. Every cent he earned, every repair he made, was dedicated to the boy sleeping in the next room. Evan was known as the building's silent guardian, the unofficial handyman. He was the kind of man who would fix a leaky faucet for the elderly lady on the third floor or troubleshoot a blown fuse for a struggling student, always refusing a single dime. His decisions were governed by a singular, unyielding rule. What is best for Lucas? He had built a wall around their life, a fortress of routine and simplicity that kept the complications of the outside world at bay. When the new neighbor moved into 4B, he barely registered her presence beyond the sound of moving boxes being dragged across the floor. He was too busy balancing grocery bags and late-night school projects. But tonight, fate knocked on his door. She introduced herself as Claire. She looked tired, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that suggested a long day of unpacking. She mentioned she was recently divorced, a detail that hung in the air like an unwanted confession. Evan kept his head down as he worked on her TV, his focus narrowed to the task at hand. He avoided looking directly at her, concentrating instead on the frayed coaxial cable and the dust bunnies behind the entertainment unit. "It's just a loose connection," he muttered, his voice gravelly from a day of silence. "These old building connectors are temperamental." Claire tried to keep her tone casual, asking polite questions about the building's quirks and the best places for takeout nearby. Her voice was soft, carrying an accent that felt hauntingly familiar, like a melody he had tried to forget. Evan's hands froze for a split second as he reached for a pair of pliers. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. Around her neck hung a delicate silver necklace, a small, intricate locket. A memory hit him like a physical blow, a visceral flashback to a humid summer night 10 years ago. He remembered a promise made under the sweeping branches of a willow tree, a promise that had been shattered by distance and silence. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, pushing the thought away. "It's just a coincidence," he told himself firmly. Lockets are common, memories are unreliable. He finished the repair, his fingers moving with a practiced speed born of a desire to escape. Suddenly, a small voice broke the heavy tension in the room. "Dad, are you done yet? I can't find my dinosaur, the blue one with the spikes." Lucas was standing in the doorway of the living room, rubbing his eyes and yawning. Claire stiffened visibly. She turned toward the boy, her breath catching in her throat with a soft, audible gasp. The color drained from her face as she looked from the child's innocent face back to Evan, her eyes wide with a realization that made the air in the small apartment feel thin and suffocating. Evan packed his tools with frantic efficiency, the metallic clatter of his pliers echoing in the silence. "All set," he said, standing up and avoiding her gaze. Claire reached for her purse, her hand trembling as she fumbled with the zipper. "How much do I mean, thank you, Evan. I didn't expect..." Don't worry about it, Evan interrupted, his voice sharp with a sudden need to be gone. Neighborly favor. Welcome to the building. As he led Lucas back across the hall to their sanctuary, he didn't look back once. He locked the door and leaned against it, his heart hammering against his ribs. But across the hall, Claire stood in the middle of her half-unpacked living room, staring at the closed door. A single hot tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her pale cheek. She knew that face. She knew that voice. And now the most terrifying realization of all. She knew he had a son who shared his eyes. The following morning, the elevator ride was the longest 60 seconds of Evan's life. The building's old machinery groaned as the car descended. Claire was already inside when the doors opened on the 4th floor. They stood side by side, inches apart but worlds away, staring at the floor numbers as they lit up in a slow, agonizing sequence. The air was thick with the suffocating weight of 10 years of unsaid words. "I'm sorry about the other night," Claire said softly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the elevator. Her eyes were red-rimmed, betraying a night spent without sleep. "I was overwhelmed. I didn't mean to be so quiet. I was just surprised." Evan nodded, his jaw set so tight it ached. "It's fine. Moving is stressful. We've all been there." He kept his distance, his body language a fortress of indifference. He wasn't ready to let the ghosts in. He had spent a decade building a life where those ghosts had no power, and he wasn't about to let a chance encounter tear it down. "Do you have a large family?" she asked, her voice tinged with a desperate kind of hope. Evan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the sliding metal doors. "No, just me and my son. We've been on our own for a long time." The words seemed to strike her like a physical force. She sagged slightly against the elevator wall, her gaze dropping to her shoes. She didn't ask about his wife. She didn't ask how long he'd been alone, or what had happened to the man she once knew. She just stood there, absorbed in a quiet grief that Evan didn't yet understand, a grief he mistook for regret. Over the next few weeks, the universe seemed determined to keep them in the same orbit. Claire seemed to find every possible reason to be in the hallway when he was leaving for work or returning with Lucas. She would ask about the best local grocery store, where to get the mail key copied, or if the radiator noise was normal. Evan remained polite but brief, a master of the one-word answer. He was protecting his peace. He was protecting the fragile world he had built for Lucas. One evening, while Evan was distracted by a sizzling pan of garlic and onions, Lucas managed to slip out of the apartment. Evan found the boy 5 minutes later, sitting cross-legged on the hallway floor in front of Claire's open door. He was showing her a drawing he had finished at school. It was a picture of 3 people standing under a giant, disproportionately large yellow sun. "Lucas, come here," Evan called out, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and irritation. Claire looked up, and Evan saw the raw vulnerability in her expression. She had been crying again. She was holding the drawing by its edges as if it were a sacred relic made of ancient, brittle glass. "He's a very talented artist, Evan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He has your eyes for detail." Evan stood at the threshold of her apartment, the smell of burnt garlic drifting from his own kitchen, serving as a reminder of his responsibilities. He felt the anger he'd buried for 10 long years bubbling up to the surface. "Why are you here, Claire? Out of all the buildings in this city, out of all the neighborhoods, why did you have to pick this one?" Claire stood up, her voice a fragile thread that threatened to break at any moment. "I didn't know you lived here, Evan. I swear on my life. I just wanted a fresh start. I wanted to go somewhere no one knew my name. But seeing him, seeing your son," she choked back a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "I didn't know you had a child. I had no idea you were a father." Evan crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "Well, life goes on. People change. I had to grow up because I had someone counting on me. We aren't those impulsive kids anymore, Claire. That life is dead." Claire stepped closer, her eyes searching his for any spark of the man who used to love her. "I never stopped thinking about you, Evan, even when I moved away. Even when I tried to build something new, there was always a part of me that stayed back there, in that summer." Evan felt a sharp pang in his chest, A ghost of a feeling he thought he had successfully exorcised, but he hardened his heart. He couldn't afford to be weak. I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can be just neighbors with someone who reminds me of everything I lost. It's too much. Claire looked at him, her expression shifting from profound sadness to a sudden, sharp resolve. It was the look of someone who had carried a secret for too long and was finally ready to set it down, regardless of the consequences. Evan, there's something you need to know, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Something I never got to tell you because you changed your number, moved away, and vanished before I could find you. Evan froze. The hallway, the smell of dinner, the sound of distant traffic, it all seemed to fade into a terrifying, expectant silence. The silence in the hallway stretched until it felt like it would snap like a taut wire. Claire took a deep, shuddering breath, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You left that night after our biggest fight, she began, her voice trembling but determined. The night I told you I needed space, I tried to call you the next morning. I tried to find you at the shop where you worked, but your boss said you'd quit and left the city. Evan looked away, the memory of that night still stinging. I thought you were seeing someone else. I saw the way you were looking at that guy from the office. I thought you wanted out and were too afraid to say it. I didn't want to wait around to be replaced. I didn't want out, she whispered, a tear finally breaking free and rolling down her nose. And the reason I was so desperate to find you, the reason I called every Brooks in the phone book for months, was because I was pregnant. The world tilted on its axis. Evan felt as if the floor had suddenly turned to water. He leaned heavily against the doorframe, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. What did you just say? I was going to tell you that night, Claire continued, the words pouring out of her now. A decade of suppressed truth finally finding its way to the light. I had the test in my purse, but we fought about nothing, and everything felt so fragile. I thought I'd wait until morning when we were both calm, but then you vanished. A few weeks later, there was an accident. A rainy night, a car that didn't stop at a red light. I lost the baby, Evan. I lost everything at once. I lost you, I lost our child, and I lost the life I thought we were going to build together. Evan sank into the nearest chair in Claire's living room, his head falling into his hands. The weight of 10 years of misunderstanding and misplaced anger crashed down on him with the force of a tidal wave. All the bitterness he'd nurtured, all the what-ifs that kept him awake at night, all the times he'd cursed her name for not fighting for him, it was all based on a tragic, horrible mistake. A failure to communicate that had cost them everything. I didn't know, he managed to say, his voice breaking into a dry sob. Claire, I'm so sorry. I was a coward. I didn't stay to hear the truth. I didn't ask. I just ran because it was easier than being hurt. Claire sat on the edge of the sofa across from him, her hand reaching out but stopping just short of touching his arm. I don't blame you anymore, Evan. I spent years being angry at the world, at you, at myself. But anger is a heavy, poisonous thing to carry. I forgave you a long time ago. I just never thought I'd get the chance to tell you why I was so broken when you left. They sat there for a long time in the dim light of the apartment, the only sound the distant rhythmic hum of the building's old refrigerator. Evan confessed that he hadn't dated seriously since they broke up. He had poured every ounce of his love, his energy, and his soul into Lucas, terrified that if he opened his heart again, it would only lead to more wreckage and more grief. He's beautiful, Evan, Claire said, looking toward the door where Lucas had been. He has your stubborn chin and your kind eyes. Seeing him, it's like seeing the ghost of what might have been, but it's also a miracle. Can I meet him properly this time, she asked, her voice filled with a tentative, aching hope. Evan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the girl he used to love, now tempered by a quiet, resilient strength. He saw the scars they both carried and realized they weren't so different. He called Lucas over from the hallway. The boy walked in, looking curious and slightly confused by the heavy atmosphere. He looked at Claire, then at his father's red eyes. Is she sad because of the TV again, Dad? Did I break the drawing? Claire laughed through her tears, a sound that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. No, sweetie. The drawing is perfect. I'm just happy to finally meet you properly. Lucas tilted his head, his brow furrowed in thought. Do you hate my dad? Most people think he's grumpy because he doesn't talk much. Claire reached out and gently took the boy's small hand in hers. No, Lucas, I don't hate him. Not at all. I think your dad is a very brave man who has taken very good care of you. Evan watched them, his painful past and his precious present finally colliding in the same room. He saw a glimpse of the family that should have existed, a ghost of a life that was stolen by a car in a quick exit. But as he looked at Claire's gentle smile and Lucas's trusting face, he realized that while they couldn't fix the past, the future was still a blank page. I'm tired of running, Claire, Evan said, his voice firm and steady for the first time in a decade. I've spent 10 years running away from my own shadow. I don't want to run anymore. The healing didn't happen overnight with a cinematic flourish. It was a slow, deliberate, and sometimes awkward process. In the weeks that followed the revelation, Evan and Claire began to talk, really talk, over cups of lukewarm coffee while the city slept around them. They revisited the old memories, the good and the bad, slowly deconstructing the walls they had built. They didn't rush into a romantic reconciliation. They were two people getting to know each other again, stripped of their youthful ego and scarred by their shared history. They were learning to be friends first, navigating the complexities of their new reality with a caution born of experience. Claire started showing up in the small, meaningful ways that began to weave her into the fabric of their lives. She helped Lucas with his difficult history homework when Evan was stuck on a late-night emergency service call. She brought over home-cooked meals that actually contained fresh vegetables and herbs, a welcome and colorful change from Evan's dad's special routine of buttered pasta and frozen peas. Evan, in turn, began to open up in ways he never thought possible. He told her about the terrifying early days of being a single father, the sleepless nights filled with doubt, the fear of not being enough, and the moments of pure, unadulterated joy when Lucas first laughed or took his first steps. He showed her the scrapbooks he had meticulously kept, documenting every milestone of the boy's life. One Tuesday evening, a massive summer storm rolled through the city, lightning cracking across the dark sky. The ancient power grid for the entire block failed, plunging the building into a sudden, eerie pitch black. Evan grabbed his professional headlamp and went to work. He spent over an hour in the damp basement in the cramped main electrical closet, guided by his years of specialized experience and the steady beat of his heart. When he finally flipped the master switch, the lights in the hallways and apartments flickered back to life, one floor at a time. He walked back up to the fourth floor, sweat on his brow and grease on his hands. Claire was standing in her doorway, holding a flickering candle in a glass jar. She had prepared a simple dinner on her small balcony: fresh bread, local cheese, and summer fruit. The hero of the building returns, she teased gently, though her eyes were shining with a warmth that made Evan's chest feel tight. Lucas ran out of their apartment, hugging Evan's leg tightly. Dad, you fixed the world. Can we eat with Claire? She has the good crackers with the seeds. Claire looked at Evan, her breath held in a moment of quiet anticipation. It was a simple question from a child, but it carried the immense weight of an invitation into her life and her heart. Evan looked at his son, then at the woman who had once been his whole world and was now becoming something even more significant. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Yeah, Lucas, let's stay for dinner. As they sat on the balcony, watching the rain wash the city streets clean and listening to the distant rumble of thunder, Claire reached into her pocket. She pulled out a spare key to her apartment, its silver surface gleaming in the candlelight, and pushed it across the table toward Evan. Just in case the TV breaks again, she whispered, her voice full of a promise that went far beyond electronics. Or just in case you want to stop by for coffee. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons began to shift. Life in the old apartment building on the north side of the city took on a new, comfortable, and deeply resonant rhythm. It wasn't the fiery, impulsive, and often volatile passion of their early 20s. It was something much deeper, something built on the sturdy foundation of choice, forgiveness, and shared survival. Evan became a permanent fixture in Claire's life, not just as the man who fixed things, but as the man who stayed when things got difficult. He repaired her leaking kitchen faucet, adjusted her crooked bookshelves, and, yes, meticulously checked the TV signal whenever a heavy storm was forecasted. But more than that, he listened to her stories, shared her silences, and offered a steady hand when her own grief surfaced. Claire became the missing piece in their small, two-person household. She was there at the school gates to pick up Lucas when Evan was running late on a job across town. She was there to offer a different, softer perspective when Evan was worried about his son's social life or his grades. She brought a sense of color and warmth to their lives that Evan hadn't even realized was missing. They didn't talk about marriage or grand, expensive ceremonies. They didn't feel the need for a piece of paper to validate what they had found. The true commitment was in the small, daily acts, the way they shared their mornings, how they navigated the mundane challenges of bills and chores, and the way they looked at each other across a crowded room. One Saturday morning, the TV in Claire's living room actually did glitch out for real. The screen went a bright, humming blue, and a loud, distorted noise filled the apartment. Evan walked in, his heavy tool belt slung low on his hips, a playful grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Again? I'm starting to think you're sabotaging the equipment on purpose just to see me in my work gear." Claire leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed, watching him work with an expression of pure contentment. "Maybe I am. It's the only way to get the most expensive and talented repairman in the city into my living room on a Saturday morning." Evan laughed, his hands moving expertly as he tightened a loose screw on the back panel. "Well, you're in luck, lady. For you, I'm offering a lifetime guarantee. Free repairs and maintenance for as long as you'll have me around." Claire walked over and rested her head on his sturdy shoulder, the scent of his cologne mixing with the smell of the morning coffee. "I don't plan on moving ever again, Evan. I think I've finally found where I'm supposed to be." Lucas came running in from the hallway, jumping onto the sofa and grabbing the remote. "Hey, if you guys are done with all the mushy talking, can we actually watch the movie now? Our whole family is finally here." Evan paused, the word family echoing in the quiet room like a bell. He realized then that a family doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to follow a straight, predictable line from point A to point B. Sometimes it's a thing that is broken and then painstakingly repaired, held together by the incredible strength of two people who decided that the past was just a series of lessons and the present was a precious gift they refused to squander. There are people who drift apart because of a simple misunderstanding, lost in the noise of their own pride. But the ones who truly matter are the ones who find their way back, not because they have to, but because they choose to. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Kind Single Father